there were a few students that have been to the workshop before, and they were telling me how psychedelic it was going to be, and how powerful it was. And I went to the workshop feeling pretty skeptical. I was like, I don't really believe in this. I don't know how your breath could be that powerful. And it was a very profound experience. And again, I think it helped me to process a lot of trauma that I was holding in my body from that near-death experience, like physical trauma, but also this deep emotional trauma that was in my body. And so, that just having a profound experience with breath work, I was just like, I need to do this. Like, I really just want to learn more about it. And it was such a simple technique, no substances are involved. It's just you, your breath. You're in a group and you're listening to music with eye shades, and it's a very internal process. And, I was just really just fascinated by the whole thing.
So pretty quickly into that experience, you realized that it wasn't hocus pocus, and there was some magical things that could happen just through breath techniques.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that really stood out was kind of like the somatic part of it. So like, and somatic just comes from the Greek word soma, which means body. So, it allowed me to process this stuff I was holding on to in a more like cathartic, physical cathartic way. And before, I was just really analytical in my mind, trying to process things. Like, our culture is very cerebral in our minds and very analytical at times. And to be able to like feel all this in my body. And when you think about trauma, I mean, one of the key symptoms of trauma is dissociation. And a lot of people that suffer from PTSD or any sort of trauma, it's pretty common to dissociate and not have a connection with your body. And so this technique kind of allowed me to come back to my body and feel all this stuff in my body. And I said, wow, like I've just been ignoring this for so long. And so I think that was the part that just got me really interested in the technique. And, and the transpersonal phenomenon that came from that of like reliving a birth experience. And I followed up with my mom, and, she said that happened. And I was like, what the hell is going on here? How could my body remember that? Or how could I have an experience and then it validate it? Like, that just was really interesting to me. So
for anyone listening to this podcast that might be interested in breath work or holotropic breath work, do you have like a simple practice that someone might be able to do just to kind of get their foot in there and kind of see what it's like?
Yeah, so this is a question we get asked often, like, can I do holotropic breath work or, the breath work that you teach by myself? And, my answer is no. For this technique specifically, it's best to go to a group and do it under a trained facilitator, because it can be very cathartic, and, you can kind of have these big emotional releases, and you want to be under supervision under that. Just in case anything comes up, it could be re-triggering or re-traumatizing for some people. So, but if you're interested in exploring, breath work and the power of doing any sort of breathing technique, there's a lot of different things that you can do just to kind of get a sense of like what it feels like to practice a breathing technique. So there's this really popular breathing technique called Wim Hof. And I do it every once in a while, but it's 30 like deep, fast breaths into the belly. So you're not hyperventilating. Hyperventilation is more shallow breathing. So it's deep inhales into the belly and doing kind of 30 rounds of that. So it's like, and at the 30, you hold it for as long as you can and then exhale. And you could feel your body become a little bit more energized, maybe a little bit tingly. And, that could just be an interesting way to just feel what it's like to intensify your breathing and feel what it's like to feel that kind of go through your body and feel some of that, like maybe quote unquote energy become a little bit more activated. A technique that I do, and this might just come from years of doing this breathing technique, but I like to do it in conjunction with meditation. So just finding my space, taking a couple deep breaths into my belly, dropping into my body, and then, if I feel like any anxiety or tension in my body, I like to take a couple deep breaths into that and be a little bit curious about why I might feel that tension or anxiety in there. And then just do a lot of experimenting of focusing on the deep breathing. So breathing into that space, into the belly, and then do some movement. I like to practice a little bit of like yoga and stretching. So like say if I feel like a little bit of anxiety in my stomach, right? And so I would sit down kind of in a meditation, take a couple deep breaths into that space, explore it, and really kind of sit with that feeling of anxiety and be like, what's going on here? And you can use the breath to intensify that feeling. So if you start breathing faster and deeper, you could kind of activate it. Slower, deeper breathing can just kind of help, relax those feelings. So I really like to use the breath as like an experiment to kind of explore my body in different ways. So, even if like listeners just wanted to experiment, like, what does it feel like to do deep, slow breathing? And then what does it feel like to maybe intensify that breath a little bit? And just kind of be curious, like how your breath changes your physiology, how it changes your emotional states.
So do you have a daily practice, or does it vary day to day with your breath work?
It varies day to day. Like, I think my daily practice is just a little bit of breath awareness and like becoming aware of my body. Like if I'm feeling like a little stiff, or like if I just becoming aware that my breathing's shallow, like I'll take a conscious moment to maybe drop my shoulders back and take a couple deep breaths to open that up. Like, if I'm just working a lot, I'm like hunched over, I'm like, okay, I feel a little anxious. I notice like my body is hunched over and I'm probably breathing really shallow. Can I actually just like take the time to open my chest up, take a couple deep, slow breaths into my belly and just be with myself for a little bit? And so, for me, it's just really about breath awareness and just being in touch with that is my daily practice. And then another practice that I try to do daily, maybe I skip a day, depending on it, but it's kind of like that somatic breath work that I was just describing. I would sit in some sort of meditation, drop into my body. If I feel any tensions, breathe into those spaces. Maybe sometimes I do a little bit of like self-massage. One part of our breathing technique, we include body work. And so I incorporate that into my practice. It's just like, if I feel a tension, say, again, in my stomach, maybe I'd place my hand on my stomach and take a couple deep breaths, and I'd be playing like, just light meditation music in the background and just feel what it feels like to breathe into that tightness. And maybe, I'm applying a tiny little bit of pressure on it, or doing some self-massage and trying to like maybe break up some of that tension. So, so conscious breath awareness throughout the day, just being aware of how I'm breathing. And then, I have more of a somatic type of experience that I do before I go to bed. Just incorporates deep breathing and just kind of connecting with my body.
Do you have any sort of breath practice or protocol that you use when you're using psychedelics?
Yeah, it's another good question. A lot of people ask us if, do you take psychedelics and do something like holotropic breathwork? So the way that I view the breath is a vehicle, and psychedelics are a vehicle and a tool as well. And this is something I think engaging in holotropic breathwork has taught me, that like, throughout cultures, different cultures and societies had all these different tools and practices to foster these non-ordinary states of consciousness, whether it's a psychedelic, a plant medicine, breath work, physical pain, isolation. If you look at in like indigenous rites of passages, there's all sorts of techniques to access these non-ordinary states. And I guess having psychedelic experiences early on and then engaging in breathwork like really kind of taught me that all these experiences are inside, but there's all these different ways of getting there. And so, in the psychedelic work, I would use the breath as a way to guide my inner experience. So, for example, some people talk about bad trips, right? Like, what is a bad trip? Well, we like to reframe what is a bad trip to a really difficult emotion or difficult experience. So if somebody was having a more, I guess, like conscious experience with psychedelics, if they were like setting up a space where they went in with an intention, maybe not more recreational, if somebody's using it like a concert or something like that, but a more intentional way of using these substances, and using your breath as a way to navigate the emotions and feelings that are coming up. And so, if somebody was having an experience where they're feeling a little bit overwhelming, what is it like to then connect with your breath and breathe through these experiences? Not really ignoring what's coming up, but incorporating the breath in a way to be a little bit more curious about what's coming up and to work through those experiences. And so I see the breath as this vehicle to kind of navigate these spaces a little bit more, because in our holotropic breathwork, there's this kind of saying that we sometimes say at the beginning of a workshop. It's never give up an opportunity for death and dismemberment. Sounds a little brutal, but in these states, we talk about double bookkeeping, which is you're on the mat breathing, but you might also be having a vision of being chased by a jaguar in the jungle. And then what would it be like if you actually let the jaguar eat you, right? It's a classic kind of death and rebirth experience that some people can do. And even if you thought about that in sense of dreams, right? Like, what happens if like you were having a dream of being chased and something was coming towards you, and you wake up before that happens, but if in the dream, what would it be like if you could actually like let that thing unfold? And so going through the breathwork technique kind of has taught me to stick with these difficult feelings, emotions, or visions, and breathe through it a little bit more, to stick with it. And so, yeah, the breath for me is like a vehicle in that space. If something comes up, if I want to intensify the experience or maybe like go into it a little bit more, I would intensify my breathing. If it's a little too overwhelming, I'm like, oh, I don't want to go there, this is too much, slow my breathing down, do like deep, slower belly breaths instead of intensifying it. So for me, the breath is just a tool to navigate these psychic spaces.
Yeah, that sounds like my second ayahuasca ceremony.
Of being chased by the jaguar.
Well, no, I'm just like what you're describing about breathing into things is where I learned that you can breathe yourself through anything, because it wasn't dark in any sense of the way, but it was just so I couldn't comprehend it. So that became so overwhelming, and I just kept reminding myself, like, you can breathe through anything. We can get through this. You can breathe through anything.
Right. And was that something that was just intuitive for you that came up, or was there something in your mind you're like, oh, I know breath can be really powerful?
It was intuitive because as I was trying to wrap my head around what was going on in the hut, I noticed that I wasn't breathing, or I caught myself not breathing. And then I would remind myself, like, breathe. Okay, we can breathe through everything. And then the deeper that I was breathing, the more the colors and the patterns and everything would slow down. And then I would start to really appreciate the moment. And then once I started appreciating the moment, I would forget to breathe again, and things would speed up and get out of control. And it kind of went through this cycle for probably an hour or two while everything else was going on around me. And I was in a hut with 6 shaman, and this all kind of went down, and I hadn't even been paying attention to the fact that 5 of the shaman had come by and sung their Icaros to me. It wasn't until the elder statesman had finished working on me that I kind of came to and realized, like, holy cow, I just had no idea. Like, the last 2 hours just blew by.
Right. Yeah, and that's an interesting statement that you're saying, like, I forgot that I was, like, breathing, or forgot to breathe deeper, right? I mean, I think that even can translate into simple day-to-day life with anxiety, right? Having an anxiety attack and feeling anxious. It's like, what is it like to become conscious and be like, ooh, like maybe I'm not breathing enough. And what does it feel like to actually maybe become a little bit more conscious of your breathing and breathe into it a little bit more? And so, yeah, I think it is a very intuitive thing. And sometimes